Shabbat Shalom, everybody. This is really new to me. Anybody who knows me knows how unsavvy I am in technology. And so I am speaking to you today like this. Having done a class yesterday via Zoom, so life itself is turning me into a technological creature, which I've never before used to be. So if things look weird, if I look odd, if something seems off, it's me. But here we are in a Shabbat loaded, laden with things that we can share and we should talk about and can talk about. And there's sort of three things that I want to focus on today. One of them clearly is that which is going on. We are all sort of in hibernation mode in our own homes, isolated, quarantined, not necessarily by choice. There are some scary things going on out there, something we can talk about. There is, of course, the centerpiece of who we are, which is our Torah portion for this week. We'll mention it some as well. There's something to be learned there. And then this week has been designated as Refugee Shabbat. And so we're going to talk about that as well, because that is in fact a centerpiece in Judaism. But let me start first with a very beautiful poem that was sent to me, written by a cantor, Lynn Unger, just a few days ago, about what's going on and how we can absorb it, feel it, and let it wash over us. What if you thought of it as the Jews consider the Sabbath, the most sacred of times? Cease from travel, cease from buying and selling, give up just for now on trying to make the world different than it is. Sing, pray, touch only those to whom you commit your life. Center down. And when your body has become still, reach out with your heart. Know that we are connected in ways that are terrifying and beautiful. You could hardly deny that now. Know that our lives are in one another's hands. Surely that has become clear. Do not reach out your hands. Reach out your heart. Reach out your words. Reach out all the tendrils of compassion that move invisibly where we cannot touch. Promise this world your love, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, so long as we all shall live. That is indeed very beautiful, because it is a kind of forced Shabbat. We are not to do anything. That is a positive way to try and do it. This week, as I said earlier, is Refugee Shabbat. And the truly important thing to know is that the Torah portion itself, in fact, every portion is something to do with the Jews being refugees. Think about it. A refugee is a person who has been forced to flee their home due to persecution because of their race, religion, nationality, political opinion, etc., etc., etc. Our ancestors, the Israelites, as they fled from Egypt, this is precisely what they were: refugees. Yes, they were slaves for 400 years. And then, under the leadership of the great Moses, and with divine guidance, finally were able to flee, to escape. They were refugees. So in very, very simple terms, what that means is that you and I and every one of our brethren are the offspring of refugees. And it is their ability to escape that allowed us to live and flourish as Jews. And so our Torah portion today actually is called Vayakhel. Actually, Vayakhel Pekudei, it is a combo of two portions because we do not have a leap year this year. And so a couple of times, few times, their portions are combined or there'll be too many. And the word Vayakhel, of course, comes from Kehillah, which means congregation or community. And it talks about the fact that Moses gathered the people into community. And that, of course, reminds us that that is our strength. Being a community, being together. And that is how, when we think about refugees, we need to remember that it is really both our history as well as our task. To shamor v'zachor, as it says in the Lecha Dodi, which we sing every Shabbat, we need to observe and remember. Observe meaning act, and remember, that is the part of the heart and the soul. The really interesting thing about the business of Judaism's central value of caring for the refugee and the stranger is how many times it is mentioned in our sacred writings. Let me remind you of a few, just in case some of us don't always remember that it is that central. Even in Genesis, before we were the refugee people escaping from the land in which we lived for 400 years, remember Abraham. Abraham sat as in his entrance to his tent and welcomed 3 strangers. He didn't know them from Adam. He washed their feet. he, together with his son Yishmael, brought them food prepared by Sarah, which, by the way, is a subtle way of reminding us that caring for the stranger, for the unknown person who comes, who needs to be invited, is something we need to teach our children. Abraham did do that. So that is one, as early as Genesis. Our rabbis have written it in multiple sacred midrash stories and commentaries on biblical writings. Exodus is filled with it. First of all, the story itself, and then, for instance, in Exodus 22, we are told that we are not allowed to wrong or oppress the stranger. Reason, of course, because we were strangers who were wronged and oppressed. And thus, we need to never repeat that type of activity upon others. Book of Numbers, same thing. A stranger who has taken residence with you, they shall have one law with you. You can't, shouldn't have different laws for strangers, for they are no less God's creatures, God's creations, than are you. Book of Leviticus, the stranger who resides with you shall be to you as your citizen. There it is. Biblical writings. This is universal. Deuteronomy, same thing. Book of Psalms, beautiful Psalm, Psalm 39. Hear my prayer, God, give ear to my cry. Do not disregard my tears, for I am a stranger with you, temporary dweller, like all my ancestors. The entire Passover Haggadah, and Passover is around the corner. That is about our experience as refugees. And one of the first things we say in the Haggadah, one of the items in the Haggadah, which is in Aramaic, Ha lachma anya di achalu avhatana be'arad Mitzrayim. This is the bread of afflictions that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Whoever is hungry, let them come and eat. Whoever is in need, let them come and conduct the Passover Seder with us. Lots and lots of rabbinic literature of the same subject. So let me invite you, please, to remember these always and to reflect on these, particularly on this weekend. But let these reflections lead to an understanding and a frame of mind which embraces the knowledge that refugees must indeed be embraced by us. You know, I am thinking today, as I speak to you about this, about my aunt and uncle and cousins whom I've never met, a sister of my father's of blessed memory, Rabbi Joseph Kalir, one of his sisters, and her family were on that ill-fated ship called the St. Louis during the years of World War II, escaping from the Nazis, attempting to escape. The ship St. Louis came to the shores of our country with Jews desperate to escape and find a home here. And they were rejected. They were not allowed in. And that ship, sadly, was forced to return to Europe. And my aunt and uncle and cousins, whom I've never met, ultimately were butchered, were slaughtered in Auschwitz. This is what happens. This is what can happen when refugees are rejected. So, turning to something lovelier, always lovelier, which is Torah. You know, I can't help but think about something that I encountered as I was leafing through the pages to arrive at our portion, which is Vayakhel Pkudei. And, you know, just before, literally the words just before, they were describing Moses, who was just coming down from Sinai with the tablets, right? Came down with the tablets. By the way, and this happened twice. Remember the first time he came down with tablets after 40 days, 40 days being up there. He came down and found them dancing around a golden calf. They messed up big time. And so he broke them. He was beyond angry. But then he finally went up again. And interestingly, this time it said that Moses carved the tablets. You know, the first time, I remember it said that God carved the tablets. Moses came down, and those are the ones he broke. And this time, Moses carved them, got those commandments down on them again. And it tells us that this time his face shone. It shone. It had such an intense shine to it, rays radiated from it, that it said the people actually had to turn away. They couldn't look at it. It was that amazing, a shine. And I thought to myself, that's clearly a metaphor for something. And it's probably a metaphor for more than one thing. First, this business of shining and not being too close may be a metaphor to the fact that we need our leaders to be charismatic, engaging, but not maybe too close or too familiar in order to be effective. Secondly, I thought it was interesting that it said that Moses carved the tablets and not like the first ones that God, and that I was thinking maybe it also means something about the fact that you are filled with shine, with satisfaction when you do something rather than just get it from the outside. So I thought that was maybe an interesting little thing that I saw on the way to Vayakel Pkudei. By the way, sidebar, an interesting story about translation. The Hebrew of the fact that his face shone uses the word karan or panav. The word keren in Hebrew means ray. For instance, from the sun, when the sun shines, it's keren. But the word keren also means horn, like gazelle. Somebody long, long ago translated it the wrong way with the word horn. And if you know anything about the very famous, very beautiful Michelangelo statue of Moses, sitting there with a beard, you know that two little horns come out of his head. That's because Michelangelo read that terrible old translation that somebody latched onto and didn't change, and they thought, and he immortalized the idea that Moses had two horns. But that's not at all what it said. The word keren, karan or panav, his face shone with rays of light. But just remember how awful it can be when translation gets it wrong. I grew up in Jerusalem, Israel, and I went to school there, and the very, very first serious book that we read as soon as we knew how to read was the Torah. That was actually every day we had Torah class, right? And so very early on, as soon as we knew how to read and were comfortable with it, I believe it was by third grade, we started immediately with Bereshit, Genesis, and on we went. And being isolated like this and thinking about things and remembering things from long ago, I did remember talking a little bit about Vayakel Pkudei, this portion, and remembering the importance of togetherness and kehillah and community. And among the things that I was remembering brought about by the word kehillah is that the understanding of it has really become concrete in some of the actions which we take today. Thinking again about Pesach, which is around the corner, we have Elijah's cup standing there. I have favorite memories from childhood, where there would be wine in the cup, and my father would always point very seriously to the cup once the door was opened, shfoch hamatcha, and say, look, Elijah came in and took a sip. You see, it's a little bit less. And boy, let me tell you, I looked at the thing and I really believed it. It seemed to me like it was less. It was a magical moment every year. Couldn't wait for it. But the last years, a new tradition has entered some of the homes, and maybe yours as well, that I have observed, where they pour the cup is empty. Elijah's cup is empty. And everyone takes their own wine cup and pours a teeny bit of wine into Elijah's cup. Elijah's cup being the cup that represents the bringing of the Messiah, Messianic days, right? Our pouring each from our own cup clearly sends the messages: if we want Messianic times to come, we have to do it together as a kehillah, as a community. That is our task. That is our own future. And so we ourselves can do that for the world, but only together, vayakhel, as a kehillah. You know, to me, always, music is everything. You know, I've always said God lives in the music because words are not necessary. And the magic of stringing notes from nothingness into divinely gorgeous melodies is God. And so music to me is a unifier, globally, Jewishly, everywhere, in every shape, in every form. And it makes us, when we sing together at services, into a kehillah kedosha, a holy, a sacred community. And once again, you know, sitting here, you know, thinking, schlepping along, what to say and so on, I remembered again from my childhood when we were reading in class. I know I must have been under 10 years old, maybe 10 at the most. In Hebrew class, you know, just like you have English here where you read English readers, like English literature of sorts. We were reading Hebrew writers. Sometimes there were actually writers who wrote in Yiddish, who came from the European countries, but their writings were translated into Hebrew. And one such writer was Yud Lamed Peretz, Y.L. Peretz. And we read a bunch of his stuff with a wonderful teacher. I remember her name was Shoshana Bergstein. Yeah, I went to a school called Ma'aleh in Jerusalem, and Shoshana Bergstein was my teacher from 5th grade on. So maybe I was a little older than 10. My first teacher of Torah was Devorah Lebanon, legendary in Jerusalem at that time. But with Shoshana Bergstein, I remember reading a story by Yud Lamed Peretz, and that has something to do with music. I remember very little about the story, except there was a man who, he was sort of, he played a musical instrument, he was a musician, and he made sure that every one of his sons also played an instrument. And when he was dying, he called his sons into his room and he asked them to play their instruments. Everybody got their instrument and they played. And it was beautiful music with which they sent his soul homeward. And I think what Yud Lamed Peretz there said was something like, and their home or their house was filled with beautiful music. And once again, it was this business of music together, like a band. And that's in a way how I see us. How I see us being toward each other, with each other, practicing tikkun olam, repairing the world, practicing loving the stranger, practicing embracing Shabbat, bringing God into our homes and into our hearts with that special radiance of music, in a sense, being God's orchestra. And so I thought what I would like to do is to end the way I started, with something that deals more with what's going on today. Sorry, you saw my arm, and I'm not good at this. But this was a beautiful piece of writing, written not by a Jewish person. This was sent to me by a dear friend, and this was actually written by Christian clergy, Father Richard Hendrick. And I'm going to not read it in its entirety, but some of it that I think fits. It's about today, and it's about all of us, and it's about all the time. He called it lockdown. Yes, there is fear. Yes, there is isolation. Yes, there is panic buying. Yes, there is sickness. Yes, there is even death. But they say that in the streets of Italy, people are singing to each other across the empty squares, keeping their windows open so that those who are alone may hear the sounds of family around them. They say that a hotel in the west of Ireland is offering free meals and delivery to the housebound. All over the world, people are slowing down and reflecting. All over the world, people are looking at their neighbors in a new way. All over the world, people are waking up to a new reality, to how big we really are, to how little control we really have, to what really matters, to love. So we pray and we remember that, yes, there is fear, but there does not have to be hate. Yes, there is isolation, but there does not have to be loneliness. Yes, there is panic buying, but there does not have to be meanness. Yes, there is sickness, but there does not have to be disease of the soul. Yes, there is even death, but there can always be a rebirth of love. Wake to the choices you make as to how to live now. Today, breathe. Listen behind the factory noises of your panic. The birds are singing again. The sky will be clearing. Spring will be coming. And we can always be encompassed by love. Open the windows of your soul. And though you may not be able to touch across the empty square, sing. Shabbat Shalom.